Okay, let me show you what I see. It's a 26-page file, and as soon as I open it, the first thing I look at is the universal logical model, which is on the very last 2 pages. As soon as I open up those pages, I instantaneously see that there's gaps in the model structure. I can see that the attributes, even though it's only supposed to be a logical model and it's not supposed to be in granular detail, you can see where there's issues with the entities being able to connect to one another and where there's fundamental attributes completely missing. So then what do? You immediately go look at the rest of the metadata. You look at the business terms and the glossaries. And as soon as you start to do a compare between the actual ULM and then the data dictionary or their business terms, you instantaneously see where there's gaps in it. So one example, let me show you. Okay, this is the UML, the universal model. And as you look at it, you can see, we're gonna move in, there we go, boom, right into there. This particular entity is designed, and it doesn't have all the attributes because the actual specification calls out the granular details, like I said. But this particular entity is designed to explain that you would be sending over one of the attributes about the actual practitioner to include you see gender, right? And so as you want to get more familiar with what each of these different things mean, the best thing to do to make sure that you're understanding the terms that they intend for you to understand is to take a look at the pages that call out the definitions. So close your eyes because I'm about to scroll. Okay, so I scrolled up and you can see that I scrolled up to page number 16. And this is the implementation guide. I told you before that there was an entity, or just call it a table to keep it simple, that had information about the actual practitioner. You can see on my screen that when I showed you on the first section of attributes, there was nothing that said gender. Well, for those who haven't worked this kind of data, sometimes they'll make the mistake of calling it sex, and indeed they did. And I won't get started on all of the differences when it comes to managing data, where there's differences between managing what's a gender versus a sex. And so for the particular specification that should be used at a national level, the actual attribute name should be gender. When we look at the actual definition, move over here, and yes, I most certainly do have issues managing way too many tabs at all times. That's what happens when you love the data. So you see that the definition says that you're supposed to provide one of the valid values for the provider. They give you the choice of male or female. And generally, if you're working with a code set, you would have M or F. But when you're aligned to the FHIR standards for something like the administrative gender, or we call it an admin gender code set, then they actually use a description, or they call it a display value. And for their display values, they actually do spell out the full expression, male or female. Now, here's an important thing to call out. Over here, it says it's not required. Let me point something out to you that's very important when it comes to managing online directories. So in the United States, if you look at the statistics for how patients and prospective patients, or in this case, members, like to be able to search for the type of a practitioner that they want to be able to go see, if they want to see a physician in their area and they look up on the network directory who has the plans that they're able to go see providers for, when they do it, some of the things that members look at immediately is, what is the gender of the provider? So think about scenarios where you have an expectant mother who's looking to find someone for care. Generally, they have an interest in going to a physician who they're comfortable with. And one of the very first things they do in order to determine that is they look at gender. And so there's all sorts of white papers and statistics and industry research on the importance of being able to display what the gender is for the physicians and the clinicians that are in your directory. So now we're going to build on what I just taught. So I just taught that it's important that if you're looking at the visual model of how the data is laid out, that if the model says that you are supposed to be managing data for the gender, but yet your business term or your data definition instead uses the expression sex, that is going to cause distrust in your actual data product, because if you don't have harmonization between the actual logical model and the actual terms, then there's going to be confusion among the people who are having to actually do the development work itself. So let's stand back for a second and introduce the importance of doing your documentation for what's known as your metadata. So for those of you who don't know, data about the data is an expression called metadata. And oftentimes that contains the logical definitions that describe the term in a non-circular definition. So let's call out another gap in the national standards that were just published in the month of February that contain circular definitions. And circular definitions should not be used when you're producing specifications that the entire nation needs to align to. Okay, here we are back again. We're looking at the terms and the definitions of the terms. And so we just talked about using an expression that should have been defined as gender. And now we're moving on to the next section. So the next section is used to describe what we call like the brick and mortar or the facility. So brick and mortar, again, a facility, okay? Typically, people would refer to a facility as something like the actual hospital, as an example. We won't go into all the different details here, but when we look at facility and we see that the person who's doing the development work and all the teams upstream that are supposed to be getting the data ready to send it are supposed to send what's known as the facility name. So let's go look for our non-circular definition. Instead, it says name of facility. Who wrote this? And because this particular topic has actually had much national controversy, we're going to move below sex, but above the facility name, right where it says language. Now, keep in mind, language is going to be a future attribute. It's not one that's required now. But the expression for language is spoken needs to have a very clear definition, because when you're thinking about physicians and clinicians that work in a clinical setting, understanding what kind of a language that's supposed to be provided for them or on their behalf relates to patients and members being able to find them for care. So that means that you're going to define whether or not you want it to be a clinical language spoken, or if it's going to be, there's a ton of different expressions out there, but something that would be everyday kind of language otherwise as an alternative. So this definition instead is, once again, another circular definition. It doesn't truly show the manner in which that language value would be provided. In addition to that, for languages spoken, there are all sorts of different code sets that exist. So when your organization wants to define how a particular physician or a clinician, a practitioner, speaks a type of a language, then you need to provide a code value. And that code value needs to adhere to several of the different broadly accepted standards that are out there. This particular specification gives no granular details for the end user. Instead, it references them to a random hyperlink to a trial version or in trial use version of the directory, the PDEX directory, which your everyday folks that are out there who are trying to enable these types of technologies for the FHIR technologies, they're not going to know that they need to go to that more detailed artifact. They're literally going to try to put these specifications together with the details that were published in the 26-page guide.